There's still £10, yeah.
Cash only, I'm afraid. But Peter has some of those, and I have some down the side as well. We want to put all in a long day. Anyway, thank you very much, Peter, and I hope everyone enjoys the talk this evening. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Marianne, for inviting me back. It's not very often I get invited back, unless it's to apologise, as they say. So the first time I spoke here was the Princess Victoria, the inaugural Princess Victoria Memorial Lecture. So quite why it took 70 years to get the inaugural one off the ground, and in those 70 years, I couldn't get anybody better than me to do it. So, but I was chuffed to do it, and I say it was the launch of a book. So that was my 6th book. So I'll be shamelessly plugging each of the books at the end of the talk. So yes, thanks very much for Marianne for her inviting me along, and for her technical expertise, rescuing us there, because a bit of a panic on the go there. So yes, I'm going to talk about, it's a personal selection of 20 headstones in Larne Town Cemetery. One thing that struck me about Larne Town Cemetery is that there's a number of ways you can refer to it. So I was referring to it as Larne Greenland Cemetery, and then David Hume and Marianne said, oh no, it's the town cemetery. And I've also heard it referred to as Craigyhill Cemetery. So it's the only graveyard, only cemetery that I know that has at least 3 names. So, but I'm referring to it as Larne Town Cemetery today. So I'm conscious as well that I'm a Belfast person, so don't judge me. It doesn't make me a bad person. If you can't make out my accent, or you have problems with the volume, just point up and I'll get the message. Just be careful though to use this finger, please. So I'll rattle through them. It should take about 45 minutes. It'll feel like longer. And I'm conscious as well that you guys probably know more about a number of these people that I'll be talking about. So feel free at the end of the talk to maybe give us your thoughts about maybe some people that I mentioned, and maybe things that I didn't say about them and that you think are worthy of mention. So they're in date order, so go right back, I think, to the tail end of the 19th century, and then the most recent one is within the last few years. So without further ado then, this is the first one, and this is the Reverend Henry William Molyneux. And he was born in March 1806 near Dunadry, and educated at the Belfast Academical College. And he became the 7th Minister of First Larne when he was ordained on the 9th of June 1831. So the Carrickfergus Presbytery, the oldest in the church, visited First Larne in 1848, and their findings showed that the congregation was prospering, with 560 families in the congregation, with an average of 100 baptisms a year, and reported that the minister is a man of study, not unduly engaged in secular employments, but faithfully devoted to the duty of his office. He does not attend fairs or markets, to the disparagement of his ministerial character. So not a man who was keen on the shaps, as they say. Because of his scholarship and active participation in synod and assembly affairs, he became a well-known and much respected man throughout the church. And as a reward for his efforts, he was enthroned as moderator of the General Assembly in June 1852. It's very, very hard to see that, but it does say that he was elected as moderator in 1852 on his headstone. So in 1867, Dr. Molyneux's wife died, with the minute of 5th February 1871 mentioning the minister's illness, and he died on the 23rd of August 1871 as he sat in his armchair in the parlour. So he was survived by a son who was a solicitor in Australia, and a daughter, Mrs. Fitzsimmons, in Belfast. So that's the oldest one, the Reverend Henry William Molyneux, and I say the seventh minister of First Larne Church of Ireland. So the next one, the next one is not that one. That's not a good start. So this is the next one. This is Hugh Smiley. I'm going to stick with this, right? Yes. So I think that was the church when the Reverend Molyneux was the minister, and you can see that's the flyover. So that's down by the river, the Inver, and then this is the more modern First Presbyterian Church. So in other words, when Reverend Molyneux was the minister, it was there. So wasn't it a snooker hall or something laterally? I don't know what the Reverend Molyneux would have thought of that. All right. So there's a graveyard associated with this. Right. And I wonder, is the grave beside it in the cemetery as well the same? Because you can't see it in that photograph, but it's a very grand one as well. So there could be that those two were sitting out the front of the church before they were relocated up to the town cemetery. So the next one then is Smiley. So it was a very nice day to get a good photograph of that, this unusual kind of big rock. As folks will know, as soon as you go into the cemetery, that's there, right in front of you. So Hugh Smiley was born on the 5th of January 1841 and educated at the Royal Belfast Academical Institution. I went there, even though I can hardly say it. And Smiley later joined his father's business, which is a grain and coal merchant, and he was also a ship owner. He was secretary at a public meeting held in the courthouse in October 1863, at which the Reverend Classon Porter was chairman, when it was decided that a library and a newsroom should be established. So in other words, this is the newsroom and library here that we're in tonight. So he bought Drumalis in 1872, and 2 years later he married Elizabeth Kerr of Gallowkill in Paisley. He was appointed High Sheriff of County Antrim in 1889. He also owned a farm at Ardmore in Larne. In 1902, he gifted the Smiley Cottage Hospital to Larne. It closed in the late 1980s with the building reopening in 1994 as council offices. Hugh Houston Smiley was created the Baronet Smiley of Drumalis in Larne and Gallowhill in Paisley on the 13th of October 1903. Due to ill health, he spent a lot of time in Egypt during his latter years, and he died in 1909. So that's a photograph of Sir Hugh there, and then that's Drumalis there. On the side of the stone, it commemorates Hugh Houston Smiley, 1st Baronet, died at Drumalis, 1st March 1909. And then his wife then, she was originally from Paisley, as I mentioned, the Dowager Lady Smiley. She sold Drumalis in the 1920s and returned to Scotland, and she passed away in 1930, and she's commemorated on this panel on the side of the big stone. And then Drumalis now belongs to the Sisters of the Cross and Passion, so it's still in very, very good order. So that's the third one then, is this Commonwealth War grave. This is the most, it's not particularly unusual to have Commonwealth War graves in Larne Town Cemetery, but this one is the most recent one. And this belongs to a guy called Charles Maybury. He was born in Glarryford near Ballymena, and he served in the Western Front with the 12th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. He was discharged due to illness on the 20th September 1915, and he died of tuberculosis at Curran Street in the town on September the 11th, 1916, aged only 19. He lay in an unmarked grave for over 105 years before research from John McCormick on behalf of the Larne Great War Society uncovered evidence that the cause of death was attributable to his war service. His name was added to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission database a few years ago, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone was installed in the cemetery in early 2023. Unfortunately, the contractor placed the headstone in the right row, but at the wrong grave. So the error has now been rectified, and the Commonwealth War Grave Commission headstone now marks the final resting place of Charles Maybury. So that's a guy who died in 1915, as I say, for more than 100 years, laying an unmarked grave until this new Commonwealth War grave was put at his final resting place. So it's good that his death is now recognised, whereas it was previously just a bit of grass. The next one then, for any football fans, and we have to be aware that we are in the town of the current Irish League champions, and I say that through gritted teeth. I'm an Ards fan, so I can only dream of such honours. This is a guy who died over 100 years ago whilst playing for Larne. So the headstone to the left here, remember it's Francis Gardner, who died through an accident when playing football for Larne FC, and he died on the 24th September 1922, aged 20 years. And this is Frank Gardner here. He was a member of a well-known footballing family in Larne. Several of his brothers played for local clubs, and Frank played for the senior home side. About half an hour into a game against Ballyclare on the 24th September 1922, during an aerial challenge with Nathaniel Montgomery of Ballyclare, the two clashed heads, both falling to the ground. The two opponents were able to continue playing, but Gardner did not finish the game, leaving the field 5 minutes after returning to the pitch after half-time. When the local doctor, Dr. Rutherford, visited Gardner at his Larne home, he reported that Gardner seemed to be in a sleepy, stupid condition with his eyes shut, but was easily roused. However, Gardner died 12 hours after sustaining the injury, with, in the opinion of Dr. Rutherford, death due to severe concussion of the brain, possibly attended by some laceration, and a verdict of accidental death was subsequently recorded. According to the Larne Times, many prominent residents, as well as a strong contingent of footballers, fellow workers and members of the local branch of the Ulster Unionist Labour Association attended, and Larne, as well as Larne and Ballyclare comrades, were especially represented by the captain, Thomas Johnson, and Samuel Dysart, respectively. So that's, it's good to see, however, that Larne, on the anniversary, on the centenary of his passing, did put flowers here at the grave. So even though, again, he died over 100 years ago, he's not forgotten. And you might be able to see another war fatality here, a brother of Francis who predeceased him. He died, George, Lance Corporal with the 1st Battalion of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, who fell in action 1st October 1918, aged 20 years, interred in that is the New British Cemetery in France. So that's the Gardner plot. The next one then is one that struck me as first time I saw it when you go into the cemetery, because it's the Reverend Andrew Boyd, MA, and this is the headstone here. This is a close-up. It says, Rector of Larne, 1906 to 1925, died in the church vestry after preaching at divine service Sunday evening, June 14th, 1925. It says, his story lives on, woven into the stuff of other men's lives. So this is the Reverend Boyd here. He was a native of Swatra in County Londonderry, educated at Coleraine Inst, and he graduated in 1886 with first-class honours in the Royal University of Ireland, obtaining a studentship in modern literature. He was an assistant master at Campbell College, and he was appointed to the curacy of Antrim before being curate at Drumbeg and then St Barnabas before coming to Larne. He was described after his death as a man of wide reading and wide sympathies. His enthusiastic interest in all branches of art was tempered by humanity and sanity of judgment. From his love and enjoyment of music, of painting, of drama and literature, he brought to bear in his duties an enriched mind, a soul alive to beauty and life. He was also remembered as a cultured preacher and a brilliant scholar, and his death, according to the papers, created a great sensation. So I like to think that he was maybe a man who was in here on a number of occasions because he was an art lover, so he would have been here when it was used for other cultural events. So, according to the newspaper, the reverend gentleman had not been in robust health for some years, but was able to discharge his parochial duties with the assistance of a curate. Of late months, he had been preaching regularly once a week, generally each Sunday evening, and last Sunday evening he preached in his usual virile style without any manifest discomfort. Immediately upon the conclusions of his sermon, however, he was overcome with weakness and went direct into the vestry, whilst the Reverend Frederick Mitchell of St Mary's, Belfast, concluded the service. Dr. Thomas Killen was in attendance, but his efforts to revive the rector were in vain, and death took place from heart failure in a comparatively few minutes. So in 1927, Canon Kerr produced a 175-page book called The Reverend Andrew Boyd, M.A., Rector of Larne, 1906 to 1925, a brief memoir. So that's the Reverend Boyd. So again, quite a striking bit of text on his headstone. Next one then is, this guy's not actually buried here. He's commemorated here. And it commemorates D. Daniel Higgins, RIF, Royal Irish Fusiliers, killed in Newtownards by enemy action, 16th April 1940. So that was a German air raid. People generally think and refer to the German air raids of 1940 and 41 as the Belfast Blitz. Sorry, I've just realised that the date's actually wrong on that. So it was 1941, so it says 1940, but it's 1941. So that was part of the raids in the Belfast Blitz, referred to as the Belfast Blitz. People don't realise, however, there were a small number of bombs in Bangor, also in Dublin, and also in County Londonderry. So falling on ex-servicemen's cottages at Mazine Park, when there was, I think, 9 people killed. But Daniel Higgins was one of a number of people who died at Newtownards airfield during the German bombing raid on the night of 15th, 16th April 1941. He was aged 25 at the time of his death. He was the son of Robert and Ellen Higgins of St John's Place in Larne. He was one of 13 personnel, 7 of whom were teenagers from the 70th Battalion Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers who died in the bombing and are commemorated on a memorial in the War Memorial Park in Ards. So that's the memorial in Ards, down by the war, in the War Memorial Park. So that is actually Daniel Higgins' grave, Commonwealth War grave in Movilla Cemetery in Newtownards. So the same cemetery where Blair Main, for example, is buried in that graveyard, and not too far from Daniel Higgins. So he's only commemorated on this plot, on this headstone. He's not actually buried there. He's buried in Ards. Also, you might be able to see that there's also commemorated here as a J. McAllister, and killed in Belfast by accident on 13th September 1940, and then an R. McAllister, RUR, Royal Ulster Rifles, killed in the Battle of France, 7th June 1944. I think the Battle of France was D-Day Overlord. So I don't know the relation. I can't remember the relationship between the Higginses and the McAllisters, but he's perhaps cousins. But he's commemorated there in the town cemetery. But I say that's his grave, and that he's commemorated along with 12 other guys who died as a result of the German air raids. The next one then is another war one. And this is the Second World War in this case. You can see there Sergeant J.H. Wright, RAMC, Royal Army Medical Corps, died 14th October 1941 whilst in active service and interred in Hadra British War Memorial Cemetery in Alexandria in Egypt. So this is the Hadra War Cemetery in Egypt. So he was a husband of Elizabeth Wright of Larne, and the dedication on his grave over in Alexandria states, "Resting where no shadows fall." Also commemorated on the headstone, as you might be able to see, is another son, in other words, a brother of J.H. Wright, and that is the Reverend, sorry, that's T. Wright, Rifleman T. Wright, RER Royal Ulster Rifles, killed in action in Korea on the 3rd or 4th of January 1951. So they don't know exactly when he died. It was certainly early January, and again he would be buried over in Korea. So again, he's only commemorated there. As you perhaps know, that the people were killed in either of the world wars. Then they were commemorated on a headstone in their locality. So giving the family then a location where they could go and remember their loved ones. So they're often not buried there, but their bodies, if they were ever recovered, are usually buried overseas. So this is I'm going to mention the Princess Victoria a few times here. This is the final resting place then of Roseanne Baxter, and you can see there on her, it says, who lost her life in the MV Princess Victoria disaster, 31st January 1953. This is Roseanne here, and she was a 39-year-old stewardess from the town of Larne. She'd been a wren during World War II before working in the cross-channel service, initially with the Princess Margaret. She was last seen on the ship's deck, in other words, Princess Victoria deck, holding a baby in her arms. Roseanne's death notices include insertions from the officers and members of the Chain Memorial Women's LOL number 33, of which her sister Jean was her highly esteemed secretary. The first and last Dart Club, Larne and District Ornithologic Birdwatchers Society, of which her father Robert was an esteemed member, and the members of the ETU Larne branch. So that's the Roseanne Baxter's funeral cortege going up to the town cemetery, and I think that's the corner just down the road here. So she's going up. There's the cortege. Just look at the number of people there to pay their respects to Roseanne Baxter. The next one then is this one. One of the things that I tried to say in my book was that was contrasting the likes of when you see Roseanne Baxter's grave, it tells you a good bit more about how she died. But in this case, this is all that this little pot here is all that commemorates this man who also died in the Princess Victoria. So I put him in because of the contrast. He was called Andrew McMurtry, and he was married to Anne with one son, and he was a 56-year-old living at 3 Drummond Street in the town. He was a ship's carpenter on the Princess Margaret and was travelling home for weekend leave. After service in the Great War, McMurtry had spent most of his working life at sea. When the Princess Victoria got into trouble, McMurtry had assisted the crew in their failed attempt to close the breached stern doors, collapsing in the car deck as a result of his exertions before he was assisted back to the ship's lounge. Funeral notices included from the Worshipful Master, Wardens and Brethren of St Patrick's Union Masonic Lodge 175 at Relu, and members of the Larne branch British Legion, as well as members of the 12th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles OCA, Old Contemptibles Association. So again, that's all that's there, just is this little thing here. You can just about read the McMurtry to commemorate Andrew McMurtry. Another one commemorating on the side panel here, Robert John Holden Ritchie, died 31st January 1953, result of the MV Princess Victoria disaster. This is Robert here. He lived at 22 Newington Avenue in the town, so that's number 22 there. He was a butcher by trade, and he served his apprenticeship at Tom Graham's Butchers in the town. He'd been working in England, was returning home to Larne. His body was recovered by the SS Clonlee off Douglas Head in the Isle of Man 5 days after the disaster. Robert was a member of the Orange Order and a very keen lambag drummer, also interested in pigeon racing. A solitary family announcement in the local newspapers in the weeks following the disaster records Robert as Robert John Holden Ritchie, missing, deeply mourned by his sorrowing mother and brother. So one of my friends from Queens, Andrew Ritchie, who's a VP of Vice Principal of a local school, that was an uncle of Andrew's. Maybe a great uncle, sorry. And the final Princess Victoria one then is this new headstone, and it says William McParker, result of, and his dates, result of Princess Victoria disaster. This is William here, and he was a second steward on the ship. He was aged 35 at the time of his death. He was a native of Castle Kennedy in Scotland, and he lived in Larne with his wife Nellie and 3 children for more than a decade. His home address was recorded as 13 Waterloo Road at the time of his death. Aged 15, he'd started work on the Princess ships as a pantry boy, and had been promoted on a number of occasions. During his 20-year service, he'd served in the Princess Maud at Dunkirk and at the Normandy invasion. He was described as always being well-dressed, very popular and very generous and kind. Tributes included from the members of the Larne Branch British Legion, the Royal Ancient Order of Buffaloes, Older Fleet Lodge, number 7954, and the Boyne Defenders Junior LOL number 23, of which William's son Samuel was a member. So that's the last of the Princess Victoria one. We'll jump forward now into the early 70s, and there's a number of RUC victims are buried in the town cemetery. This is William Robert Russell. He's commemorated here as dearly loved husband of Renee, killed during the execution of his duty as Detective Constable RUC, 1st November 1971. So he was a 31-year-old married father of 1, shot dead along with his colleague Stanley Corey. So this is Constable Russell here and Constable Corey here. They were both investigating a burglary at the Lady Fair Boutique at the Avoca Park in Andersonstown. The 2 detectives were just putting fingerprinted glass into a bag when the terrorists arrived and fired 21 cartridges from their doorway, most hitting the policemen. After the killings, a crowd of shouting and jeering women gathered in the area, and troops outside the shops were stoned. So Stanley Corey here, he was aged 28 at the time of his death, and he was married with 2 children, aged 3 and 5. Constable Russell, he was William Robert, but he's known as Bertie. He left a 1-year-old daughter and a pregnant wife. So that's a fairly grainy image from his funeral up to the town cemetery. I say he was murdered on the 1st of November 1971. So this is another football one. This is to give our friend at the back another opportunity to cheer for Larne, and as if it was needed. So this is a guy called Bertie Fulton, and he's commemorated here. Robert Patrick, known as Bertie, born 1906 and died 1979. This is Bertie Fulton here. He began his footballing career with his hometown club, in other words Larne. Then he played briefly with Belfast Celtic, where he gained an Irish League medal in the 1925-26 season. He then moved to London to train as a teacher. He came back then to Belfast Celtic in May 1926 and won a City Cup medal. He then re-signed for Larne and was capped for the first time for Ireland in a 4-0 defeat by France in February 1928. He was back at Celtic Park, in other words, played for Belfast Celtic for the 1928-29 season, and was then Ireland's regular left back. In 1936, he was elected for the Great Britain team at the Berlin Olympics, playing in a 2-0 victory over China and a 5-4 defeat by Poland. That seems like a good game. He rejected overtures from the likes of Manchester United to turn professional. The 1942-43 season was to be Fulton's last as the Belfast Celtic player, and he then came back for a further spell, a 3rd spell at Edinburgh Park, and that finished his playing career. He later returned to Belfast Celtic to coach the second 11, but some consider that Fulton was the tactical brains behind Elisha Scott's great Belfast Celtic team of the 1930s and the 1940s. That's Bertie Fulton, regularly Ireland's left back. When I was up at the cemetery today trying to take a better photograph of the grave, Alphonsus, the great guy up there, he mentioned about Bertie Fulton's granddaughter, Anne, and you can see there she was only 21, 22 when she died. She was killed in a car accident along with another girl down in Sligo. I think it was in November 2000. Does anybody remember that incident? Yeah. It was his daughter? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, so Bertie had a son called Bertie, and that's his daughter, yeah. So I think that Bertie's still alive, isn't he? Yeah, yeah. So, is it another Bertie? All right. I suppose you couldn't play for anybody else if you're called Bertie Fulton, yeah. So, yes, it's, by all accounts, a phenomenal player. And I say the brains behind the Belfast Celtic operation when Elisha Scott perhaps got all the credit. But Bertie Fulton maybe deserves some of the credit. So this is another sporting one, and you can see the two boxing gloves on the top. So this is Kenny Webb, beloved son of Mona and Kenneth, brother and best friend of Olivia and Roy, died 22nd June 1986, aged only 28 years. I haven't been able to get a photograph of Kenneth, or Kenny, sorry, but his granda is mentioned here in this from the Ulster Hall. He's mentioned about here as fighting. He was another boxer. I think that was 1928. And then one of Kenny's brothers does he still live in the town? Roy? Roy. He's a car dealer, right? I wouldn't argue with him anyway. I wouldn't try to arrange. Was he sponsored Larne? Right? Didn't realise that. So Kenneth seems to be a name that runs in the family, but Kenny boxed at the 1978 Commonwealth Games, and Roy boxed around the world and was inducted. So these are both feature Roy, and was inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame in Larne a few years ago. So the next one then is Philip Robert Houston. And again, it's very hard to get a good photograph of this, as I have proved. But you can see there, died, we may be able to see, died 6th July 1988, Piper Alpha disaster, lovingly remembered by his wife, Mary Rose, and son, Nigel James. And then at the base then it says, worthy of everlasting remembrance. So this is the Piper Alpha disaster. Many of you will remember it, when an oil rig exploded and sank on the 6th of July 1988, killing 165 of the individuals, mostly males, on board. 30 of the bodies were never recovered. So that's a photograph of the Piper Alpha after the fire had more or less gone out, and then this is some of those fortunate enough to survive the disaster. So it's pretty grim to think that that there's a Larne man involved in that amongst the 165 fatalities. This is another RUC guy, and Derek Monteith. He's not buried here, he's commemorated here. So he's commemorated here as Derek, Inspector RUC, murdered by terrorists, 22nd January 1990 in Turd, Drumsallon. And then you can see then this is the George Cross medal, I think, and then the RUC medal, logo there. This is Derek Monteith. And he was a 35-year-old shot dead at his home in Kilburn Park in Armagh. So this is the street, Kilburn Park, and then this is Derek Monteith's coffin. And he was buried in Drumsallon Church of Ireland, which graveyard, which is in Eglish. So this is Drumsallon here in Eglish. So again, he's commemorated on the headstone, but he's not buried there. Sadly, his father died less than 6 months after him, after his son Derek, 15th May 1990, and then his mum died 5 years later in 1995. A good friend of mine, Sam, this was Derek Monteith was his boss, sorry, and he described him as an absolute gentleman and superb at his job, never forgotten. So the next one then is this one. This guy actually died on the same day as Derek Monteith was murdered. And it's hard to see, but this is like a Commonwealth War Grave style headstone laid here, and he's also commemorated here. Philip Carson Thompson. He was born the 10th of May 1960, died 22nd January 1990, and Lance Corporal. He was a Lance Corporal with the 119 UDR Ulster Defence Regiment, and at age 29 at the time of his death, and he died as a result of a road traffic accident in Larne. So it's just very sad that he died on the same day that Derek Monteith died as well. So another RUC one. Apologies, it's very RUC heavy, this one, this presentation, but you know it's something that interests me. This is Constable Edward Wilson Spence, murdered by terrorists in execution of his duty, died 27th May 1981, aged 26 years, and he's commemorated as a dear husband and a devoted father. And you can see the RUC logo there. This is Edward Wilson Spence, and he was married with a young family. On the 25th of May 1981, he was shot 5 times by the IRA during a hit-and-run gun attack whilst on RUC foot patrol in Lower Crescent off University Road. So in other words, up near Botanic, and he died 2 days later from his injuries. So this is another. It's not. I have to admire you coming out on a lovely night like this to listen to me talking about dead people. But this is another one that stuck in my mind. It's Stuart Hunter, and you can see treasured memories of Stuart. Life brutally taken on the 1st of August 1987, age 24. He was a son, a brother, and a friend. It says, "Shine on, you crazy diamond," and then Dark Island here. So he was bludgeoned to death with an axe outside his home at Ballymullock Road in Larne. So many of you remember that as well, I would imagine. The last one I'm going to talk about then is this guy. And again, apologies for talking about football again. Gives you another chance to. And this is Sammy Hughes. So as you can see, perhaps see there, the Glentoran logo is there. And so this is Sammy Hughes here. He was born in the Harryville area of Ballymena. Aged only 14, he signed for Cliftonville Youths before spells at Linfield and Larne. After success at Inver Park, Kilmarnock wanted to sign Hughes, and their manager Alex Hastings actually made the trip to Ulster. But in stepped the Glens, and a £500 signing on fee began his happy association with the East Belfast club. The 1949-50 season was the beginning of a successful period for the club. The season also witnessed the return of Glentoran to the Oval after it had been destroyed in the German air attacks in Belfast in 1941. So Glentoran played away from the Oval for 9 years after the Germans bombed the Oval. Hughes reached his zenith in 1952-53 when he accumulated 64 goals, then a post-match record, collecting Irish League, City Cup and Ulster Cup medals and winning the prestigious Ulster Footballer of the Year trophy. And he was selected for Northern Ireland's 6-week coast-to-coast tour of the United States and Canada, including games at the Delarmore Stadium in Montreal. He fractured his ankle there, and which sidelined him. However, the following season, in 37 matches, he scored 30 goals. And as the Glens finished a point behind Linfield in the Irish League. They also lost to Derry City in an epic 3-match cup final, watched by an aggregate 93,285 spectators at Windsor Park. So over 30,000 spectators at each of those 3 games. Hughes' career total was an astonishing 287 goals in 378 matches, and his feats as a centre forward are heralded in song and story, and he ranks 3rd in the Oval's club's all-time scorers. There is, in fact, a big image of Sammy Hughes on the side of the stand at the Oval. So I think it might have fallen down now, which is typical because the stand's nearly falling down anyway. So I'll finish with a couple of quirky ones, which Justin likes. The first one then, did you know that Robin Hood is buried in the town cemetery? There he is. And then the last one then is this one. So this is rather eye-catching. So it commemorates John Gallagher. He was born the 25th of February 1976, and he died the 27th of January 2018. It says, precious memories of our dear son, brother, uncle, partner and dad. But it also says here at the top, no signal and 0%. So it's, I think it's a man who was on his phone even more than my daughter, perhaps. So thanks very much for listening. These are my first 4 books. So I did a book about the Belfast City Cemetery up on the junction of the Falls Road and the White Rock Road. And then the second book then was about Dundonald Cemetery. I'm from Dundonald. Then the third book, is called 2020. Anybody guess when that came out? 2021. Because it was supposed to come out in 2020, but of course that 2020 was a year unlike any other. So it's 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries. So for example, there's Carnmoney Cemetery. That's where Alex Higgins is buried. Larne McCabe is buried in there as well. It mentions Derry City Cemetery, where John Hume is buried. Innes McCormack, Cecil Francis Alexander, who wrote Once in Royal David City, and there is Greenhill Far Away, are all buried in Derry City Cemetery. It talks about Movilla Cemetery and Ards, with Blair Main, etc. Audley Patterson, if anybody saw the programme a while ago, within the last year, about the jazz singer Audley Patterson, she's buried in Movilla as well. And the fourth book is about Roselawn. This is my granny and granda. They're buried there. That's them on their wedding day. And then the back cover then is their final resting place in Roselawn. The fifth book then was about 50 footballers. So these are some of the footballers that feature. This is Harry Gregg. This is Bertie Fulton, who I mentioned earlier. Ryan McBride, so the Brandywell, where Derry City play, is named after, is now the Ryan McBride Brandywell Stadium. This is Alan MacDonald. Any people remember Alan MacDonald? Played for QPR in Northern Ireland and did a famous interview at Wembley when they got a 0-0 draw in the '86 World Cup to qualify for the World Cup, and he basically challenged anybody to a fight that was going to say it was a fix. Then George Best, I look after the George Best Childhood Home, which is now an Airbnb in Belfast. I do public tours there every Friday morning, so he features in it as well. Jimmy Jones, Belfast Celtic. Charlie Tully, Cheeky Charlie, Glasgow Celtic and Belfast Celtic. Adrian Doherty, if any Man United fans here, you have my sympathies, but you don't have my sympathies, in fact. It'll learn you. Adrian Doherty was more talented than Ryan Wilson, who became Ryan Giggs, but he got a cruciate ligament injury before he got his call up to the first team, and that he never played at the senior level after that. But he was even better than Ryan Giggs. But he died young in an accident in Holland. And then the sub then is Bertie Peacock. So anybody that is familiar with Bishops in Coleraine, if you've got anybody in spending lots of money on Bishops, as you're hanging about outside, Bertie Peacock's statue is just outside there. I'm speaking from experience. Then this is the Princess Victoria book. I say I have copies of each of the books here. So it's 70 graves of victims of the Princess Victoria disaster 70 years on. So that's the book that I launched here on the 30th of January this year. I also have a copy. These are, again, at my book launch, I plugged somebody else's book, which is an unusual thing to do, but I'm going to do it again. This is Stephen Cameron's book about Princess Victoria. So this is very, very hard to get, but if you make me an offer I can't understand, I would sell you this afterwards as well. So I'll not sign it because it'd be a bit wrong to sign somebody else's book. but I'm happy to sign my books. So that's the Princess Victoria one. And then the next book then is, I've gone for a complete departure because I'm working on a book about somebody who's still alive. So I used to say that the living are of no interest whatsoever to me, but this guy here is, as you can maybe tell, this is him celebrating his 70th birthday, as you do. And so there's a guy called Stuart Barber writing his story, and it's 70 stories about his life so far. This is him running the Belfast Marathon this year, and when he trains and does a marathon, he has all this climbing gear, and then he's raising money for Cancer Focus. So all monies that are raised from the book will go towards Cancer Focus as vital work. And this is the kind of he's a mountaineer, so he's climbed Kilimanjaro a number of times. He climbed the 6th highest peak in the world, Chow Io, I think it was called. This is him on that when he nearly died. He heard his own eulogy on the radio. He heard somebody saying about it was terrible, who was going to tell his wife that he'd gone, and then he realised that it was actually him that they were talking about. So he had to then, his radio turned off, and he got caught in an avalanche. So anyway, so that's Stuart. So yes, I'll before I do finish, I'll mention my YouTube channel. Justin, who's recording at the back there, him and I do a weekly YouTube. I was going to say podcast is not a podcast. We produce a weekly podcast or a weekly YouTube video. It comes out every Sunday at 12 o'clock. So we'll go all around Northern Ireland, and there's even one down south. Dolores O'Riordan, the lead singer of the Cranberries, she's buried outside Limerick, and so it's free to subscribe. So it's Peter McCabe's Memorable Memorials. I think if you just search for McCabe's Memorable Memorials, it will come up. So I say it's free, and so you only get one video a week. So we've covered the likes of George Best, Audley Patterson, Blair Main, Frank Carson. So Frank Carson's buried in Milltown. His headstone's in the shape of the Giant's Causeway, and it says it's a cracker, and it's the way I tell him on the headstone, and it says something like, I bet you it's quieter down there now that I'm up here, or something like that. It says that in the headstone as well. So thanks very much for listening, and thanks again for coming along on this lovely night. Each of my books are available here if you want. They're usually a tenner. The smaller ones are a tenner. So I'll sign them if you're interested, instantly devaluing them. Thank you.